Good morning guys. Today is the Saturday reaction video. Today is going to be, I think, episode 6, and it's also going to be episode 7 as well, because next week I'm going to go to a wedding. Yes. So basically it's my brother's wedding next week, so I'm probably going to be posting next week's episode as well. So I'm basically going to put it all in one video. I'm going to put this week's episode and then also next week's video all in just one video, okay? Loving her new tank. She is loving it, okay? She is loving it. She's loving it. And I put the hammock on top of the humidity. Of course, I'll probably have to check her humidity today, her poop spot. But basically what's going to happen when she turns a year old is she's going to the vet. She's going to make sure everything's healthy. And she's also going to have her poop checked as well. So, so please try not to mind that, okay? I'm going to be going to a wedding. Yes, I'm going to film some of it, but I'm not going to film all, okay? So, get your popcorn, sit down, relax, and let's start reacting to this week's episode.
Good morning, Reptilians. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Elle, and this is Elle's World Talks. This week, we are doing a video that I have done for every other animal. I mean, a lot of other animals except for leopard geckos, and that is 10 things that I wish I knew before I got my leopard gecko. Not sure how I managed to do all the other ones and not leopard geckos, but here we are. Before we get started, this video is sponsored by the Doobie Dude, so make sure to stay to the end of the video to find out how you can save 10% off your entire order at thedoobiedoo.com. Let's get started. So the very first one on the list is that babies are shy. Baby leopard geckos are super teeny tiny, so of course they're shy. You're a lot bigger than them. Of course they're going to be scared of you at first. This definitely took a lot of getting used to after starting out with a bearded dragon and a ball python. I think we got Sylvanas before we got Percy. Starting out with those animals who are not necessarily super shy as babies, and then moving to a leopard gecko took a lot of getting used to, and a lot of me feel like I was doing something wrong, but that is not the case. They are just super shy as babies, and that's normal. Keep putting in that time, be patient, and eventually they will come around. Next up, leopard geckos usually eat their own shed. This would have been a lesson to cause for concern had I known it right out of the gate, because I was used to my bearded dragon shedding all the time, and you would find the pieces of shed everywhere all the time, and you knew that she was growing. But with leopard geckos, since they eat it and there's no trace of shed left behind, you just kind of have to hope for the best and hope they're growing. As long as you can see that your leopard gecko is not losing weight, as long as you use the bathroom correctly, as long as they're doing all those things, then they are probably growing. I hope you guys are enjoying this. You just want to have that shed there to be a reassuring sign that they are.
Rex didn't want to come see us.
This next one is a big one, and it obviously is not going to apply to every single leopard gecko, but it did apply to both of my females.
Rex,
and that is
it's always on the
at around 18 months, they will just kind
She's
of
always on the way,
this really stubborn phase. Around 18 months is when a leopard gecko is officially an adult. They transition from being a juvenile to being adult. So around that 12 to 18 month time frame, they just kind of stop eating. They just don't want to eat. They get very stubborn. They may hide a lot, and apparently that is completely normal. Both
she had a lot, especially in her new vet
because I was super worried about them because they weren't eating, and they had x-rays, they had labs done, they had everything, and they were completely healthy. And both times the reptile specialist informed me that this is just kind of something that happens. I'm not a vet, so this is not veterinary advice, but for my personal situation, in that situation, the vet suggested that I just take their food bowl completely out of the tank for about a week and then put it back in with fresh food, and that
I've
should
never
keep them
experienced that
into
before.
eating, make them want to eat
The
again,
girl
and
loves
it
to
worked.
eat.
It worked for both of them, so again,
'Cause she's
not
eating
vet-
super
not giving
brains now,
you
by the way.
veterinary advice, but that is what worked for my
And she's
little
loving
geckos
those.
when that happened.
Like,
Obviously,
she'll eat her
your little
mealworms.
gecko is showing other signs like lethargy.
But she's loving her
losing weight,
silkworms
they're losing a lot of weight
even
in
more.
their tail. They have any kind of tremors or anything like that, then they definitely
Can't wait
go
to
the
find
vet.
out what her
But we're
favorite
just
is.
talking about that small little window of time that this sometimes happens. They love to dig. When I very first got Percy, the big thing was to keep leopard geckos on tile or non-adhesive shelf liner, paper towels, things like that, because at
Yeah,
that
I was
point,
thinking about tile. I
years
could
ago,
put tile in
everyone was
her
so
tank
worried
as like a
about
feeding
impactions.
feeding
That was
wood.
the go-to thing. It wasn't
So
until
she doesn't
later
ingest
in my
dirt?
keeping of leopard geckos that I learned that they adore bioactive tanks and that impaction issues are usually more of an incorrect habitat situation mixed with calcium sand situation and less of just a
Yeah, she is not
living
gonna be as lucky
substrate.
as me.
I really wish that I knew much sooner that normal
I do not
substrates
want her
were
on sand
perfectly
at all.
okay. I wish I knew how much Percy was gonna love to dig. That is her favorite pastime. She just does
It's
it for
okay.
fun, and I wish I knew that sooner because she definitely would have had a dig box a whole lot sooner. Their body language in general. This is the reason that I made an entire leopard gecko body language sort of video, just to kind of show little things that they do, because leopard geckos have so much personality, and
You're
you
okay.
can just see it happening
You're okay.
as they do things. Little tail flickers or tail waves. So many different
I've-
things that they do.
I've seen her
and
tail
you can
wave
just
before.
kind of see what's going on in their heads a little bit if you know what to look for. Yeah, just super cool. Leopard geckos can get addicted to waxworms. This is one that thankfully
I
I
would be in
never
her
had to
waxworm
deal
one
with
day.
personally, but it is one
Oh,
that I
wait
felt
till
like
she-
really needed to be on this list because I feel like a
Oh,
lot of
don't
beginners
forget
are going to watch this list. Leopard geckos can just love waxworms so much that they only want to eat that, and they just will kind of stop eating everything else because they only want to be fed
Okay,
waxworms.
okay.
This is not something that is super common, but it is something
You're
that
okay.
can happen. I have always used waxworms as a treat, but the way that you avoid this is by not feeding them waxworms as their staple food. If they are getting a constant supply of waxworms and then you cut that supply off and try to replace it with something like mealworms or duvia roaches, there is a chance that they are
Yeah, I was gonna feed her duvia roaches.
All they want to eat is waxworms. So do not ever make waxworms a staple food for
I was
the
gonna
geckos,
feed her
which
duvia
usually
roaches.
is very high in fat content. Just be careful
Oh,
if
I'm
you are
down
going
with
to
duvia
feed
roaches.
waxworms. Just something I felt like was super important to put into this
Mm,
video.
Sometimes you just gotta
They
do what's
will
best for your
benefit
butt
from
crack.
UVB light. This is another one when I first got my leopard gecko that was not a big thing. It was well known at that point that leopard geckos did not need UVB lighting. They just needed
Good
heat
call.
and just some sort of day-night
You're
cycle.
such a
But
good-
it has
you're such a
since
good-
been
you're
discovered
such a good-
that they very much will benefit from UVB
You're
lighting.
such a good-
Them going without
you're
UVB
such a good-
lighting isn't something that's going to necessarily be a health hazard for them, but having UVB lighting can increase their activity levels, it can increase their appetite, it can just make them
Yeah, I'm
happier
thinking
in
about
life,
UVB,
and
but I
wish
just
knew
don't know
that
if it'll
sooner, because I would
benefit her
have
in the long
got
run.
Percy a UVB light so much sooner than I did. On that note, I wish that I had deep heat
But
projectors on
I
my
could
tanks
talk to a
as heat
vet,
source
like that's what
so
I'm
much
gonna do,
sooner.
talk
I
to a
really
vet
couldn't have because they didn't exist
before I
at
do
that
that.
point, but I love deep heat projectors. Basking bulbs are great. Different sources of heat are great, but I just absolutely love
how
deep
much-
heat
how much
projectors.
UVB
The
is
heat
going in?
penetrates all the way into the tank and into
Like, what should be
hives,
after?
and the animals seem to really
But
enjoy
if you guys have
eating
any
out of it.
comments,
They
just let
don't
me
put on
know.
lights, so you can use them 24/7, and they last. I have not had to replace a single one of these deep heat projectors, which are
Huh.
in five different tanks right now. They've
Five?
been in those tanks for months upon months upon months. Probably going on at least a year now, I think, for Starlings. I haven't had to replace them. They've just lasted, which
Starlings are really
if you
good
use
anyway,
bulbs,
right?
you know that is not the case with
This is
bulbs.
L
I just love
repels, if
them,
you
I love
guys
the
don't know.
heat that they put off, and the animals seem to really enjoy them too. Leopard geckos can be fast. They don't really look like they can be. They kind of just
Yeah, they can
slowly
be.
move around and like wag their tail around and stuff. But if they get startled, they can sprint. This is super important.
And
to know,
I have
especially
experienced
if you are attempting to do something like put them on your shoulder, like you would if you're a dragon, which is something that I do not recommend doing. if something scares them, if a sudden movement is made, if your hair touches them wrong, if a dog barks, anything that could possibly scare them, if that happens and they decide to sprint, they could get seriously injured. So make sure that you are watching them very closely if you are carrying them around, or standing up and holding them, because yeah, they can be fast, and it is rather startling when they do start to run fast, and we don't want you to accidentally drop that leopard gecko.
I love her.
And the last one on this list is just that leopard geckos, from gecko to gecko, their personalities are vastly different. You can have two geckos and they can be completely different personality types. That is the case with mine. Percy absolutely loves being out and being held. Winter does not like being touched
she's being held
at
like a
all.
baby.
She likes being hand-fed.
She
likes
a baby.
me feeding her food.
She loves being
She does
held
not
like
like
a
being
baby.
touched. Percy absolutely hates being in water.
So, like,
She doesn't like
her
being
favorite
wet.
thing.
Whereas Winter splashes around in her water dish almost every night, and I have to refill her water bowl.
Being a mommy's hand.
Almost every day, because she loves
like,
playing
that's
in
her
her
favorite.
water bowl so much. They can have completely different
Whenever she does, she likes to be on my
super
hand.
cool, because honestly, getting a second leopard gecko was never
What are you
planned for
doing?
me. I just
What are you
saw
doing?
her on Craigslist, and
What are
she
you
clearly
doing?
needed a new home, and that wasn't something that I was going to
What are
do
you doing?
because I already had a leopard gecko.
What are you doing,
But
pretty
them
girl?
having such different personalities, it feels
I
like I
always
have two
like to
completely
call her
separate
pretty
animals.
girl
Super,
because
super
she is a girl.
But that is it. That's all that
And
I
she
have
deserves
for this
the
week's
best.
video. Hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something about your leopard gecko. If your leopard gecko does something cool or crazy, or you found out something quickly after getting your leopard gecko that you wish you'd known sooner, make sure to leave it down
like that.
below so that other people can learn this sort of stuff too.
It's
As I said at the
okay.
beginning of this video is sponsored by the Doobie Doobie.
It's
Doobie
okay.
is an awesome place to get doobie roaches for animals like leopard geckos and other reptiles too. My
It's
bear
okay.
dragon obviously eats a lot of doobie roaches. My cave gecko, my crocodile skate.
So, you saw the first one. But this crazy lady. This crazy woman. Yes. And that's one thing that you did not know. Is I want you guys to know that when you have a leopard gecko, keep an eye on them. Because they will dart. Dart, speed, whatever. So, yeah. They will do that. Or they'll just sit in your hands just like this. So, yeah. Or they'll be good when it's in your hand. Like she's doing right now. She's a good girl. Cause I don't want to put her too close to my face because she don't like that. She don't want that. She really almost bit me the first time I did that. First time I tried giving her a kiss. Yeah. So.
Fat-tailed gecko and this.
What's the difference between the two? You probably got a pretty aggressive answer. So today, I'm going to tell you why they're so darn similar, but the few things that are actually different about them. Today, we're going to talk about the differences between an African fat-tail and a leopard gecko, and which might be best for you. I'm Adam. This is Diglett. This is Littlefoot. You're watching. So one difference I've never really noticed until I look at them side by side is Diglett, the African fattail, looks a little bit more like a dinosaur. So for this video, let's go over the scientific reasons that they're different, and then we'll compare the two to see which one would be a better pet for you. So first of all, the range is very different. Leopard geckos are from places like Iraq, Afghanistan, parts of northern India, where African fattail geckos are from Africa. There are three main differences, and we'll go over them. I guess the first one is, their range, which we just kind of went over. Number two is just a little bit of structural changes. There are differences between the two. The eyes of an African fat-tailed gecko and a leopard gecko are completely different. And, the feet are a little bit more sturdy on an African fat-tail, and the African fat-tail has a shorter tail. So they do look a little bit different, although very darn similar. Now let's talk about the size. The size of an African fat-tail is a little bit smaller than a leopard gecko. Now you can see the difference here. This is a full-grown leopard gecko. This is a juvenile or subadult African fat-tail. So the African fat tail will never get as big as the leopard geckos on average. On average, an African fat tail is going to be between 7 and 9 inches, and a leopard gecko between 7 and 10 inches. But there are giants and super giant leopard geckos, and I don't think that there are those morphs for African fat tails, or at least I've never heard of them. So for that reason, and we'll treat this like a head-to-head, we'll go one apiece, so we're tied up at 1. Number 2, this goes hand in hand. The difference between the enclosure size. There isn't one, so this is going to be very simple. A 20-gallon is what I would recommend for one leopard gecko or one African fat tail, although you could probably house a pair. I house Littlefoot and her clutchmate Sarah, her sister Sarah, in the same enclosure, which is a 20-gallon. So you could do that if you wanted to. African fat tails, same thing. Of course, you know, never put 2 males together, never put a male and female together full time. I have care guides for both. Leopard gecko up here. The difference between the enclosures between the two is very simple. Just the substrate might be a bit different because leopard geckos, they're going to need a drier type of environment, and African fat tail needs a little bit more humidity. But in the care guides, I talk all about the substrate that you'll need if you want to keep either one. So after 2 rounds, we're tied at 2 apiece. Next, we're going to talk about temperature, humidity, and lighting. And these things are somewhat similar. The big difference is humidity. Now for temperature, go over that in the care guides. It's going to be very similar. They're not going to have too much of a difference in temperature. Maybe, you know, like 5-degree recommendation difference in hotspot type thing. But otherwise, very similar. The humidity is where things really change. For a leopard gecko, 30-40%. That's what I recommend for a leopard gecko. For an African fat tail gecko, you need to be 50-ish%. Between 40 and 60 is generally what is recommended. In her human hide, I mean, they both get human hides, but I always keep the back of her enclosure, or one side of the African fat tail's enclosure, a little bit more humid, right around 55-60%. So being that they're so similar, it would just kind of depend on the, you know, where you live for the humidity. So again, it's going to be a tie. This isn't going to end in a tie, by the way. So stick around, but for now it's 3 apiece. The diet between the two, identical, almost. It's almost completely identical. You're going to want insects. They're both insectivores, so no vegetation, no flowers, no plants, no fruit, nothing like that is necessary for them to eat. They're going to eat things like dubia roaches and crickets and mealworms and superworms, appropriately sized. So I said that it's similar. It's actually an identical diet. It's basically the exact same. So whether you want an African fat tail or a leopard gecko, the food that you're going to need to keep and need to feed them is completely the same. So yeah, we're still tied. 4 apiece. So 2 more categories, and we're going to have a winner in each one. These are really what separates African fat tails and leopard geckos. Behavior. Now, obviously, this has actually been a pretty good, you know, handling session with my African fat tail Diglett. She's not a full-grown adult. She does get a little bit hissy sometimes when you pick her up out of her enclosure. She's not quite as boisterous. She's a little bit more shy. Where with Sarah, with Littlefoot and her sister Sarah, they'll come right up to the glass. They think you've got food every time. I haven't got there with this African fat tail yet. She seems a little bit more nervous, a little bit more hissy, and I think in general, between the 2 species, you'll have not a hard time with either one.
As long as I don't try to poke it.
Leopard geckos seem to be a little bit more sociable and a little bit easier to kind of interact with on a regular basis. And one last thing we'll lump in there, the African fat tail honestly feels a little bit more fragile just because she's a little bit smaller. So I think we're going to give this one to the leopard gecko, which means we're at 5 for the leopard gecko and 4 for the African fat tail. One more category left. Last category, price, availability, and morphs. And I think you guys know where this is going.
Yes.
In terms of African fat tails, they're harder to find. The morphs are more expensive and not as plentiful. So in general, it's just easier to find what you want in a leopard gecko or find one at all. If you go to Reptile Expo, you'll see leopard geckos on every other table. With African fat tails, this was the only one at the last expo that I went to. So it's going to be a little bit harder to find something like an African fat tail in comparison to a leopard gecko. Yeah, morphs are more expensive. Just all around, I think that there's really no way that I could have the African fat tail be in contention for this category. This category for sure definitely goes to the leopard gecko. So there you go. I mean, this is kind of a head-to-head where they're so similar. It's really up to you what you like best. But if I had to pick a winner, I would definitely say leopard gecko wins, and the score ends up being 4-6. But if you want an African fat tail, I don't think they're any harder to take care of at all. It just, you know, simple things like, you know, the price is different, the availability is different, the morphs are different, and then it takes maybe a little bit more more work.
I
Like
remember
the,
she
you know,
looking at my
5%
bed.
more work
She
to
always
get
likes
them
my
really
bed.
handleable and tame them down. But otherwise,
Because she always
both are
likes my bed.
fantastic animals,
For
and
odd
it's
reason.
hard to pick a winner in this one. And there you go. That is the major differences
But she
between
always likes my
African
bed.
fattails and leopard geckos. Geographic region, foot and eye structure, and their humidity levels. That's basically it. Otherwise, they are so much the same. And then the next time someone screams at you on a forum, they're completely different. They're not completely different. I mean, they're different species, but at the end of the day, the care requirements are so darn similar. You did research for one, change of humidity, and you've done the
humidity.
research for
Leopard
the other one
geckos.
also. Now, I want to mention something. If you like this video, of course, thumbs up, hit that like button, hit subscribe. I totally appreciate that. This week, we launched something new. We've got a Patreon page now. The support has been overwhelming. Thank you so much for those of you who have already subscribed. This is honestly, I can't believe how many of you have been so supportive. If you're a subscriber on this channel, I do my best to put out videos twice a week. That's not going to stop.
When you guys subscribe, make sure you put on that bell. Turn on that bell. So that way you get notified when Rex uploads a new video.